At last, it's time to ride the new Triumph Tiger 1200. We are going to be taking this one, which is the road-based GT Pro, and we're going to be giving it a proper full day thrashing around the roads. And then tomorrow, Chris is going to be riding the 1200 Rally Pro. He's going to have a great time, and I wish him well in his future endeavours. But before we get to that, let's talk about the road-based version of the Tiger 1200, the GT Pro. These videos only happen because of the support and help from our sponsors. Support the companies that support us. It's a little bit complex, stick with me. So the new Triumph Tiger 1200 comes in two main flavours. It comes in GT and it comes in Rally. GT means cast wheels, a 19-inch front wheel with an 18-inch rear, and a more road-biased adventure bike. The Rally, as you'd expect from the name, comes with skinnier tyres, a 21-inch front wheel, still an 18 on the rear, 20mm more suspension travel, and a little bit more of an off-road slant on what you're expecting to do on your adventure. Now, in addition to the Rally and the GT, you can get both bikes in standard mode or Explorer mode. And essentially what Explorer means is a bigger tank. You get a 30-litre tank on the Explorer models, 20-litre on the others. In total, there are 5 new Tiger 1200s coming out. At one end, you've got the GT, so 19-inch front wheel, 20-litre tank. That's the kind of base model. That costs £14,600 in the UK. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got Rally Explorer. So the Rally Explorer has a 30-litre tank, has the big suspension, 21-inch front wheel, and is the most premium one at £19,100. In the middle, you've kind of got every combination of those you can possibly imagine. Now, before we get into actually talking about what these things are like to ride, I want to highlight something. Triumph has repeatedly called out BMW GS as the bike that this is designed to beat. Not once, not a throwaway comment, every 5 minutes they seem to point out an area where this is better than the GS. I think in a way it's an interesting approach. The reason they've done it, they're quite clear about that. The GS sells more than any other adventure bike in the world. Why wouldn't you go for that big slice of the pie? I just hope they haven't tried so hard to outdo the GS that they've lost some of what made the Tiger 1200 great in the first place. There are a million areas to talk about on this thing, and Christ, I could lose days of my life waffling about every little technical detail on the bike and all the different things to look at. This GT Pro, this is going to be the best one for the road. This should be the highest performing road bike out of this Tiger 1200 range. Chassis wise, they've got 19-inch front, 18-inch rear, 200mm of travel, and it's got Showa's electronic semi-active suspension. That suspension features automatic preload adjustment, so however much weight you put on or off the bike, it settles and levels itself out. It's got semi-active damping, and it uses that semi-active damping system to really good effect in order to control pitch of the bike when you're accelerating and braking, kind of mimicking a telelever on a certain other motorcycle we will talk about later. It also uses that to adapt to the road conditions, and as you cycle through the modes from kind of road, rain, sport, off-road and the rider programmable modes, it kind of adjusts the algorithms to give you a slightly different feel, a slightly different character to the bike. Now let's couple that high-tech Showa suspension with a company like Triumph. It's a match made in heaven. You always know you're going to get on a modern Triumph and it is going to be a sublime handling machine. It's very rare you get on a Triumph and go, oh, that's a bit awkward, or that didn't do what I expected. I had really high expectations and high hopes for what this thing was going to be like on the road. So let's do one more really important comparison between this and the previous Tiger Explorer. This bike is 25 kilos lighter than the Triumph Tiger Explorer that it's replacing. Even the Explorer version of this with the big 30-litre fuel tank is still a massive chunk lighter than its predecessor, and they're saying that like for like it's one of the lightest adventure bikes in the class now. 25 kilos. That's a, as they pointed out, that's a bag that's too heavy to check in at the airport. That'd cost you about 500 quid if you're on EasyJet. And there's no way that this bike can fail to have been transformed by that much weight loss. Now I'm trying my best to keep things simple here, so we've done chassis, let's talk about engine. This is the 1200 T-plane crank, which basically means instead of being a woo woo, it's a rub 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 rub. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. They've given it a little bit more character, a little bit more of a lumpy bumpy feel. Reason being, that lumpy bumpy feel, that uneven firing order, gives a bit more tractability, a bit more feel, a bit more soul and character behind the throttle. It actually helps traction off-road, it helps you grip and helps you find a little bit of traction on a real rough, loose or slippery hill. And it just gives the bike, in theory, a bit more soul, a bit more character, makes it a little less linear and electronic in the way it drives. I think, I don't want to cause this by saying it, but I think that choice is gonna, I think that's gonna split opinions, because the old engine was such a lovely, smooth motor on the road and for motorway miles and for touring. By taking that away and giving the bike more character and a lumpier, bumpy motor, I think they might upset a few of the outgoing customers who loved the old Explorer. It's going to be interesting. We'll see how that one pans out. Outside of that, we're looking at 150 PS, European horsepower, 150 brake horsepower, which is a huge chunk more than the GS, 15 brake more. Down on torque though. This is 130 Newton meters of torque at 7,000 RPM. GS is 146 at just over 6,000 RPM. So again, they've outdone the GS on outright power, but on that low rev, crack the throttle, the GS in theory should be better than this. So I think, you know what? Let's leave it there. There's loads of electronics, it's got loads of other stuff. We already did a video telling you everything that's on the bike. I can't be doing this waffling anymore. Let's get on and ride the bike. I'll need a helmet. Stop worrying about what the GS is doing. The Tiger 1200 is a brilliant bike in its own right. End of. We have had a good mix of roads. I say a good mix of roads. We've had a good mix of really, really good roads. We haven't ridden any rubbish roads, so can't tell you what it's like on a boring, rainy dual carriageway. However, what I can tell you is Triumph has stayed true to its absolute core, making bikes that handle really well. Thank you. The new 1200 GT Pro on the road, adore riding it. Wow, 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 wow. You can forget you're on a big adventure bike. I've even ridden the Explorer version of this 1200 as well, the GT Pro Explorer, with the big 30-litre tank. Just loves it. Apex, 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 scream down the straight, brake, apex, apex, apex. It's just addictive. It's just such an addictive bike to charge through the bends on, in a way that, yeah, an adventure bike shouldn't be. Whatever magic voodoo Triumph does at their chassis development plant, they get it right every bloody time. And they've done it again. The only chink in the armour I found were the foot pegs. I can't tell if it's the fact that the foot pegs are low, the ground clearance is a little low, or if it's the fact that the rest of the bike works so well that you end up maybe carrying more corner speed than you otherwise would. I think it's a mix of the two. I think the fact is it's got a really good chassis that makes you want to run a load of corner speed and charge through the turns. And then the pegs being a little bit low mean you spend a lot of time, if you're pushing hard, a lot of time grinding the ends off the foot pegs. That's one small complaint. The rest of the time, and even when the foot pegs were grinding into the floor, I had a massive smile on my face. This thing absolutely rips in the turn. So hot on the heels of that chassis? Oh, the new engine. Good and bad points with the engine. We did a few kind of long straights sat at 70 mile an hour. A little bit buzzy. Just gave me eventually a little bit of tingly finger. That I think might annoy people. And I think it especially might annoy people who loved the old Tiger 1200 with the really smooth engine. However, stick with it, it's worth it. Because then when you get into a set of bends, you can wind that motor up, and once it comes on song, oh, it sounds amazing. Somehow they've managed to make a triple that sounds like a really free revving V-twin V4 type motor. It just rips off the turn when you start accelerating hard, and it is really exciting to do that one. That is one of the things that this does well. It kind of makes you forget you're on an adventure bike. You've got this really good chassis, the electronic suspension, you can tell it's working, but you can feel it doing the right things. It's kind of keeping the bike in check even when you're pushing it harder. And then you've got this engine that makes you charge rap, rap, from corner to corner, and you kind of have to pinch yourself and go, hang on a minute, I'm on a great big comfy bike with wide bars, an adjustable screen and room for a top box. They've done a really good job there. So after a day of riding on the road, I think Triumph has genuinely transformed the Tiger 1200, and you're going to hear that a lot from a lot of people reviewing this bike. It is a different beast altogether to the model it replaces. We're just about wrapped up for day one. Day two, we're going to take the rally versions of these bikes with some more knobbly tyres and give them a proper pasting through the Algarvian mountains. now I'm tomorrow Chris. Or am I today Chris? I'm tomorrow Chris today. I'm one of those. But it's time for the Rally Pro and some off-road action. Woo! Really good bike. That is a really good bike, and I've got to be honest, not what I expected. Not at all. This is the Tiger 1200 Rally Pro. Today we've been ripping it off-road on it, and yeah, a very, very capable off-road adventure bike. The biggest difference between this and the GT Pro we rode yesterday is essentially more suspension travel and a 21-inch front wheel with the spoked wheels rather than the cast ones. A few other things such as the rider modes and the bodywork and the frame colours, but that's the big difference. And again, we've been riding the Rally Pro, not the Explorer, so we've not been riding the big 30-litre tank, just the 20-litre tank. This is the most off-roady one in the new Tiger 1200 range. So what's it like off-road? I tell you what, it is pretty crazy. It's got a hell of an engine on it. The engine that really came to life when you thrashed it on the road continues to do so on the dirt. And where it's that T-plane crank, it's got that kind of uneven firing order. When you're revving it and riding it hard and sliding, it's really tractable. The connection between the throttle and the rear tyre at that moment when you're riding on and pushing on a bit is incredible. It eggs you on to do that stuff. You start riding quicker and sliding it, and it really likes that sort of charging off-road riding. The trail we rode today most of the time was kind of slightly rough, one car width, undulating terrain. We did some smaller, more nadery stuff, but it was a lot of that kind of flowing Algarve trail. And this thing was a lot of fun to charge along with a fair bit of speed. Now off-road, for me, for an adventure bike, there's kind of two sides to it. At one side, it needs to look after the rider. It needs to make off-roading a large bike as easy as possible. It needs to be forgiving, it needs to be tractable, and it needs to not catch you out. On the other side, we all kind of want them to have a fair bit of off-road performance. Whether you're going to use it or not doesn't matter. You want to know that however fast or hard you want to ride, the bike's going to be there with you. And then linked to both of those, you want to know that when you do overstep the mark, it's not going to immediately bite you and put you on your bum in the dirt. Now, let's take the first one, the speed and the riding it hard. This thing coped with a lot of fast and hard riding today. One of the things that helps on both the easy riding and the hard riding is that suspension. The front tyre and the feel through the front end was really, really impressive. On those sort of steep climbs with lots of small rocks and boulders, you're getting very little deflection. If you catch a boulder, it doesn't ping off and put you off balance. It just seemed to track through that stuff. Plush is the best way to describe it. It was just turning the roughest trails into something really predictable, and the bike never got kicked offline, kind of almost whatever I hit. At the other end of the suspension spectrum, and probably, you know, because it's so plush and so well set up for tracking the road, it does run out of travel. I'm not going to say early because we were riding quite fast and quite hard at that point, but you do then find the limit. It does bottom out and run out of travel. Oh. She does blow through the travel a little bit. I've had a couple of them now. That's at the extreme end of the usage of the bike. You know, that's when we're riding third, fourth, fifth gear into hollows off of steps and rocks. So the fact that it bottoms out under that stuff is more a testament to how fast you're riding on it. Most importantly, when you do bottom it out, and I did have a couple of real hard hits, it bottoms and then comes back gently. It stays controlled. It doesn't kick and then throw you off balance, and it doesn't do that horrible kick and try and send you over the bars. It was really, really well behaved. So you get a lot of warnings without a big drama before it ends up being a crash, which again is important for what this is supposed to do. Elsewhere on the suspension and chassis side, genuinely, that is probably one of the most impressive shaft drive systems I've ridden with off-road. A lot of the time on other shaft drive adventure bikes and on the previous Tiger 1200, up a long rough climb, the rear suspension would be clattering and bouncing and kicking, making loads of noise, the wheel would be chattering, and it just doesn't feel like the tyre's staying on the floor. This, it just felt like the tyre just stayed exactly on the floor. There was no skip, there was no patter. It was really impressive, and actually one of probably the best features about the back end of this bike. Really, really good, really confidence inspiring. So let's now switch to the other end of the off-road capability. the riding it slow, the U-turns, the slow control. It's a good bike there. It's by no means a bad bike there. A couple of small issues I found. It still does have a reasonably high center of gravity, so you do have to be careful when you get off balance. And getting me off balance, I found a few times, just that very bottom fueling response, just from no throttle to part throttle, that kind of really slow, stood up, half on the clutch, slow control maneuver. I found I was having to work quite hard on the clutch to avoid stalling or coughing the bike out. I did have a couple of real awkward stalls that, yeah, not even right at the beginning of the day, you know, long into the riding day when I was well used to the bike. So fueling and that low speed clutch control, not perfect, but by no means a bad bike in that respect. Now for me, one of the highlight standout features of this bike is how it is to ride with a bit of pace and a bit of a hooligan ride off-road. You don't need to be going full enduro, but charging fast, sweeping corners, putting it into tight turns, sliding out the other side. That front end gave me so much confidence to do that, and then the power, the way that tractable power comes on song. There wasn't a rider I saw today who wasn't power sliding this with a massive smile on their face. And adventure bikes aren't there to win races, they're there to put a smile on your face and take you long distances, and this thing does that very, very well. So one thing that is a good example of don't judge a book by its cover. I was looking around this bike, and when I first went and saw it at the Triumph factory, when you look at it, the shaft drive on the left-hand side looks like it's going to get in the way of the foot peg. It looks like it's going to push your foot out, and it was definitely something that I had in the back of my mind, and then it didn't at all. So I was wrong. I'm happy I was wrong there. But yeah, it looks like it's going to stick out and get in the way, but it never bothered me once all day. I spoke to a few riders who had bigger motocross boots on as well, and none of them had an issue with it. So it's more, I think, a visual trick, that one, than actually going to be an issue. Elsewhere on the foot controls, the adjustable gear and brake levers that you can put exactly where you want them, really, really good, letting you be in a natural position off-road. Wrapped up 2 days of pretty awesome riding on the Tiger 1200 Rally Pro. What's been nice is I've had a really good chance, with so much time on the bike, to ride slowly and sedately and cruisy when you're a bit tired, and charge around like a lunatic, and it's nice to see both sides of that coin. The Tiger 1200, bottom line, is a very, very good bike. It is a completely different animal to the outgoing 1200. It's a really, really sophisticated piece of kit that has, in the 5 different models they've brought out, actually 5 quite different flavors and quite different takes on the adventure bike. I think they're trying to get a bike that suits all people. Things the Tiger does really, really well. Chassis and handling, on-road and off-road, absolutely sublime. Really, really impressed by its performance in that world. No surprise from Triumph, they've always been good at that, but they really are excelling, especially off-road now. That's where I think they've made the most inroads. The other things I really like, the engine when you're revving it hard. Down low, off the bottom, I found a little bit of this, yeah, not great on the throttle, but once the engine's singing, oh, it is a glorious thing to ride. It sounds great, makes good power, and is really usable. Top marks. The elephant in the room, is it better than a GS? I'm not going to say, I'm not sitting on the fence about this. I don't think you can say whether it's better or worse than a GS after 2 days of riding it. I definitely think it does some things better than a GS. Feel from the front end, the chassis and the handling, both on-road and off-road. My personal opinion, I think that's slightly better than a GS. The top-end engine performance, the horsepower, it's easy to measure that. It's got more power, and it does feel faster revving between turns than the GS. I still think the GS has got the edge on slow speed control, that car park maneuver type technical terrain. And in all honesty, I think the GS has got the edge on being a GS. That, for me, is kind of the point. You're never going to make a better version of a GS unless you make a bike with boxer cylinders and telelever. I don't think Triumph should even be aiming for that, because this Tiger 1200 is a fantastic bike in its own right. Forget what the GS is. If you want a GS, go buy a GS. If you want a really good adventure bike, try them all and try this. I think you will be really, really impressed. Add to that a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty and really competitive pricing compared to the other bikes in the market. Good job, Triumph. This thing is an absolute ripper.